So my name is Joel, and I'm a theater artist, which sounds a little bit like the start of a support group, right, for artists. I say theater artist because these days I believe in the theater, in order to succeed, and by succeed I mean survive, it's best to have a diversity of roles, to be involved as a playwright, as an actor, as a director, as a producer. I said this to a friend of mine who was in Australia that was a theater artist, and he said, oh, here in Australia we just say unemployed actor. But it's not only out of necessity that I got involved in the other aspects of the theater, but out of desire. I'm going to talk tonight about verbatim theater. Does anyone have an idea what verbatim theater is? Anybody? Bueller? Colin does, yeah. We just did a show at the Belfry called Home is a Beautiful Word. And this show is very much my baby for the last 2 to 3 years. It's in the style of verbatim theater, and I became interested in verbatim theater about 6 years ago. I graduated theater school here in Oak Bay, Canadian College of Performing Arts, and was interested in acting. And I worked for about 2 years as an actor. Became more and more interested in playwriting. As a playwright, of course, we're always very interested in how people talk. How people talk to each other, how people talk to themselves, how we can be more accurate, more colorful, more truthful with how people talk. So this got me thinking. I also have some journalism training. I took an undergrad from Carleton University in radio journalism. So I was thinking, how could that help me inform my playwriting? I'm very interested in how people talk, how people talk to each other, how can journalism inform theater. And I went to the Belfry and talked to one of my friends, Aaron Macklin, who's the artistic associate there, and I said, I really want to explore how people talk. I love the spoken word, you know, the way people say and ah, and pregnant pauses and stutters and what they're connected to. She said, oh yeah, like verbatim theater. And I said, like what? It's the first time I'd heard this fancy term. She said, oh, verbatim theater is when people use interviews or transcripts of interviews or transcripts of trials or hearings to construct a play script. I said, wow. Never heard of that before. This began my relationship with verbatim theater. I returned to Carleton University to do a master's degree in journalism studies, looking at verbatim theater's relationship to journalism. I spent a year not only traveling to places like New York and Toronto to see cutting-edge verbatim theater work, but also going through verbatim theater scripts from other presenters, looking at the world of journalism ethically, and thinking to myself, how can we explore this undisputed territory? I'm not one to inflict rules on art. There's no one right way to do something when it comes to art. But I did have a hunch that if we looked at the ethics, tools, and techniques of journalism, perhaps we could inform verbatim theater practice in a positive way. Now, just to step into the realm of history for a second, verbatim theater itself is a term that came from a British theater scholar by the name of Derek Paget. Derek Paget wrote an essay on verbatim theater, as he called it, coining the term in the 80s, saying that verbatim theater practice started in the 60s. And it started, he said, because of one technological discovery. Anyone have an idea what that might be? What piece of technology could have been discovered in the 1960s? The portable tape recorder. What's your name? Ray? Rennie. Rennie? Everyone make sure you introduce yourself to Rennie. He's got some brains going on. The portable tape recorder, according to Derek Paget, empowered everyone to be a journalist. Allowed anyone to go off and interview anyone they wanted, record the interview, and make the issue that they wanted to talk about public, because they had it on recorded. He said this is what happened to allow verbatim theater practice to begin. Because then not only journalists could go and interview people, but playwrights could go and record an interview and turn it into a script. He pointed out, though, however, in his 1980s journal article, that because going and doing an interview, coming back and transcribing that whole interview, doing another interview, transcribing, the whole process was so time-consuming that although novel, it probably wasn't going to be around for very long. I'm glad to say he was wrong. Verbatim Theatre right now, I think, is one of the most exciting theatre forms on the Canadian theatre landscape. There's numerous theatre productions based on this method, and you probably know some yourself, even though you didn't know that fancy term, just like me. There are plays such as The Laramie Project, Frost Nixon, that use varying degrees of verbatim techniques. The idea of the appeal of the real. Like when you watch a documentary and you think, man, that was interesting because it was a true story. My connection to verbatim theatre wasn't just academic. I wanted to actually get involved as a theatre practitioner and do some myself. So around the time I was studying at Carleton University, I was keeping in touch with the Belfry Theatre's artistic director, a colleague and mentor of mine, Michael Shimada. And Michael was saying, it's so interesting that you're studying verbatim theatre. For years, here at Belfry in Victoria, I wanted to address the issue of homelessness on the Belfry stage, but I haven't quite figured out a way to do it. He's had people pitch him musicals about homelessness. Didn't seem quite right somehow. Cliched stories about reporters going and living with the homeless and then becoming homeless themselves. He said he wanted something that was more democratic, that let people's opinions genuinely be expressed. And so I said, how about verbatim theatre? Michael and I began a conversation over email and then on the phone while I was at Carleton University, and he said to me at the end of this conversation, would you like to come and put your techniques into practice? Would you like to come and try doing what you've been studying on the subject of homelessness? Now, of course, when you're in the arts and anyone offers you a job, the answer is yes. Especially when it's someone calling who you greatly respect from an institution such as the Belfry Theatre, that's such an important institution in Victoria's cultural landscape. That was 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago. For 3 years, I interviewed people of all manner of life across Greater Victoria. Over 500 interviews with everyone from grade 4 students to senior citizens, people living on the street, people living in shelters, people living in homes in uplands, people living in homes in the gorge. Michael and I, from the beginning, talked about how we wanted to make this a piece that was, I say, holistic. He says kaleidoscopic. Either one works. A piece that wasn't just an us and them piece, if you know what I mean. I've seen other plays before, not necessarily on the subject of homelessness, but where certain groups of people are interviewed, and you get a very clear perspective of what they're thinking and feeling, but you don't get to see the issue as it is in the larger scope of society. Our goal with what we first called the Homeless Project, that eventually became Home is a Beautiful Word, was to create a piece of theater that people would come and not only hear new opinions and feelings and arguments expressed on stage, but hear their own. And I think that one of the values of this type of theater is that you do get to hear your own point of view, and somehow that endows an importance on all the points of view, another indicator that they're real. I was very lucky to have a team of transcribers working with me to transcribe the over 500 interviews into thousands of pages of transcripts. Anyone who's ever experienced transcription knows it's a very time-consuming process. And this wasn't just transcription where you're transcribing what someone said, per se, in the words they said, but every and ah, every pregnant pause, every stutter. So you can imagine how surgeon-like the transcription had to be. If you ask a linguistics professor what these different ums and ahs and things are called, they'll tell you it's something called speech disfluencies. There's a verbatim theatre playwright named Una Duncan in Toronto who has a much tastier term. She calls them verbal deliciousnesses. Of course, when someone stutters or someone takes a pause or a breath, a sniff or a cough, it says a little bit about what's going on inside their head and inside their heart. Did anyone get a chance to see Home is a Beautiful Word at the Belfry Theatre? Got a couple of people here that saw it. Thank you. We presented Home is a Beautiful Word in January, as I said, after 3 years of not only the interview process, but doing workshops with actors, where we had professional actors come and read the transcripts of these interviews. A great diversity of voices about homelessness. In the end, 58 different voices were heard from on our stage, and the performances were completely sold out. One of the things that I was extremely excited, did you say do it again? Phone the Belfry to tell them you want to come back. One of the things I was extremely proud of, though, was in our audience, we had a great diversity of people, just like we had on the stage. The Belfry made every effort to make sure that the play was accessible. I've never heard of a theater before that has made 50 pay-what-you-can tickets available for each and every performance, as well as 20 absolutely free tickets for each and every performance. So there was a great diversity in the audience from all manner of life, just like the interview group. I'd like to stop it there just to allow for questions about Verbatim Theatre, about Home is a Beautiful Word, about what's going on at the Belfry. But hopefully I've given you a little bit of a taste, so those of you that didn't put your hands up when we call the Belfry to get them to put on the play again, can come for Home is a Beautiful Word. Questions?